I'm Loki Karuna, and this is TRILLOQUY. Thanks so much for tuning in and continuing to support this show and the movement that this show was built to inspire. Shout out to all of the longtime listeners, and shout out to those of you who may be new to the mix. TRILLOQUY is a podcast that was born back in 2019 to center dialogue around expanded views and perspectives on so called classical music. Each week, I bring a little something from the field into the space. I feature an interview with a change maker within the industry, and I close each opus with a triloquy, not a soliloquy or a colloquy, but a triloquy. For more information on the show, go check out the website. You can check past opuses there, and you can donate as well. Appreciate all of your continued support. TRILLOQUY.org. Quick shout out to everyone here in Minnesota. I'm back on a brief trip to do some interviews for the Minnesota Orchestra. Shout out to Michael Abels, who I've been having some great dialogue with this week. And shout out to Mary Ellen and everyone over at the Minnesota Orchestra for keeping me in the mix. Also, shout out to my homie Scott Blankenship for letting me crash at his place this week. I'm actually recording this from Studio B, where early episodes of the Triloquy podcast were born. Really great to be back here in the North Star State. All right, so Brian Cole comes to the show this week. He's the Chancellor of the University of North Carolina School of the Arts, or UNCSA, as it's known. Looking forward to sharing that dialogue with y'all in a few minutes here. But first, to get us started, I wanted to acknowledge Black History Month very briefly. Happy Black History Month, everyone. Black history is American history. I'll probably be doing a little something each week during this month. At UNCSA, that's in the city of Winston-Salem, North Carolina. I actually visited back in 2009 when I was looking at going to grad school there. I ended up going to the University of Southern California, but beautiful town, beautiful campus, and some really great things always going on at that institution. But what I didn't know at that time when I was visiting the city is that there's some significant Black history in Winston-Salem, and specifically regarding Western classical music, so-called classical music. So maybe you've heard of the Gateways Music Festival. It's a festival based in Rochester, New York these days. It celebrates classical music, Western classical music that's realized, performed, and supported by the African diaspora. A really incredible festival if you ever find your way up there. So this all-Black orchestral institution was actually founded, though, in Winston-Salem back in 1993 by a woman named Arminta Hummings Dumasani. I'm just going to read a little from her Wikipedia. It says here, Arminta, born in 1936, is a concert pianist and music educator who since 1960 has performed in the United States, and thanks to an International Relations Award from the United States Department in 27 other countries as well. In 1993, she founded the Gateways Music Festival, which promotes the achievements of Afro-American classical musicians. Arminta is a former associate professor of music at the Eastman School of Music in Rochester, and in 1994, she was appointed Eastman's Distinguished Community Mentor. I had the honor of meeting Arminta some years ago when I played with the Gateways Music Festival Orchestra. We talk a lot about the mainstream freedom fighters of decades past during Black History Month, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, all those folks. But we got to remember that Black women and men and individuals were also fighting this good fight back then, when it comes to this classical music so-called thing. So you can learn more about Arminta and the Gateways Music Festival at gatewaysmusicfestival.org. Huge shout out to Arminta Hummings Dumasani, a really key figure in Black history here in the United States. This is Triloquy, so I'm going to stick with the flavor of this show and remind y'all of the violinist who performed at the inaugural Gateways Music Festival down there in North Carolina. It was, yes, you guessed it, the Honorable Louis Farrakhan. He is a violinist whose contributions to Arminta's efforts helped build what we have today in the world of classical music for Black folk. Now, I'm going to play a little bit of his performance, but before I play it, I just want to remind everyone that we do a great job of separating art from artists when it comes to certain composers from certain parts of the world of certain hues, right? I'm not placing any value judgments or invalidating anyone's feelings or lived experiences around this man. As a queer person, there's a lot that I could say about, the way in which he's engaged folks like me. I'm just inviting y'all to measure Farrakhan in this single specific instance with the same ruler we've been forced to measure Wagner Orff, Granger, and countless others from the so-called canon, okay? So this clip of Farrakhan's take on the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto will transition us into my conversation with Brian Cole, once again, who's the Chancellor of the University of North Carolina School of the Arts. They've recently revamped their entire systems with a strategic plan that includes a focus on recordings of the students and faculty, professional development, and really preparing the students in a real way for the field ahead of them after they graduate. So huge thanks to Brian Cole for chatting with me, and huge thanks to y'all for listening. See y'all on the other side.
As chancellor of the university, giving leadership to the whole enterprise in terms of, we have 5 conservatories of, music, drama, dance, design and production, and filmmaking. And, what I want for all of our artists certainly is, I want to foster creativity, and I want, to people to develop, all the different kinds of creative directions they want to go in. But I also want them to be employed. The definition of employment is something that has evolved quite a bit over the last several decades as well. So I want to make sure we put that as a part of our strategic plan in terms of industry relevance. We want to be this amazing hub and ecosystem of the arts that's generating, the next decades and century of artists and creativity. But we also want that to translate into, people being able to live and gainful employment and support the kind of creative lives they want to live. So I think the key to that is you don't have to constantly be in reaction to the industry, but you have to always stay connected to it. So I want to make sure, that our programs, whether it's in music or drama or film or anything else, that they are very connected to the industry which our students are about to enter, whether they're leaving here after a high school or undergraduate degree or graduate program. I think that's a mindset that if we constantly have that as a value, then there's a greater chance of happening. And that has a lot to do with the kind of faculty that we recruit and the values that they instill to students, and making sure that the degrees we have and the classes we have, that they have a direct correlation to the kinds of things the kinds of opportunities that students are going to have. Some of those are, jobs that are actually, with companies or with organizations, but so many more of the opportunities for artists nowadays are in this other realm where they are the business themselves, where they are the product. People talk about it all the time as a portfolio career, which I think is kind of a buzzword nowadays. But I mean, it very much, the skills that you need to essentially put yourself in the center. Even if a young clarinetist has the goal, that a very traditional goal, like I want to be the principal clarinetist of the New York Philharmonic. Great, that's a fantastic goal. But even somebody who achieves that goal, that is not if you think about a portfolio like an investment, that is not their only investment. That may be the largest percentage of where they direct their time and interest, but they're still doing quite a few other things. They're still writing and teaching and producing and any number of other things. For most artists, that balance those percentages are much more balanced, 50-50, 60-40, I mean, or divided up between all kinds of different careers and activities. So part of it is making sure that students know what kind of skills are out there, that they have access to as many of them during their formative years as they can. And I think just as importantly, have a mindset to be an awareness of the environment they're going into. But it all for me just speaks back to making industry relevance a priority.
And when I think about the professional ecosystem, generally speaking, I can't help but to think about your entry into your role during 2020. I'm sure it was very atypical, maybe not a huge congratulatory party, because we were all, socially and physically distancing. But I wonder if there's anything significant that you learned. Considering that you went into your role under circumstances that the industry had never seen before, literally.
Yeah. It was a really difficult time. I mean, and I don't mean for me specifically, but for all of us. I mean, all of us at UNCSA, all of us everywhere. It was such a challenging time that wouldn't have imagined even a month or two before that. Yeah, and to your point about the moment I became chancellor, yeah, it was a virtual Zoom meeting with the UNC Board of Governors. It wasn't. It was definitely kind of, it was like all of our interactions around that time, or a large percentage of our interactions with people virtual. The thing I take away from that time when I look back on it, and even kind of realized as we were going through it, as we started to make progress, I just realized how much more we were capable of.
Mm.
The things that, and I have to give so much amazing credit to our faculty for the things that we had to do to deliver the training for our students to achieve basically the same kind of outcomes, which is, gosh, so difficult in the arts. Kind of on a side note, I remember when we would have these weekly virtual meetings at the UNC system level with other chancellors and officials of the system, talking about the protocols that we would need to have in place to be able to keep institutions open in a hybrid fashion, as much as in person as possible. And I remember when we were talking about the kind of things we'd have to do, I would hear other chancellors talk about the protocols they need to put in place for athletics, for football and basketball and wrestling and things like that. And when it came time to really talk about School of the Arts, I said, well, the things that you need to do for athletes, those are the kind of resources we need. I said, because arts is so interactive, and it is so predicated on kind of being around each other. So I say that just as a preface to saying, if you'd asked me and most of the people on our campus 6 months before we had to do this enormous pivot, if we could do, even 10% of our training online, we would have said absolutely not. No way, impossible. Yet we did that, and that is just a small example of the kind of things we were able to do. I remember we actually had live theater going on in October of 2020. We had dance instruction going on with our studios mapped out in grids and 10-foot spaces and special masks for students. We were able to do 80% of our classes at UNCSA in the arts were still in person. And so the theater example I was talking about, we had live theater. It was a devised theater presentation that we have a program in now where they're generating, theater from zero with no script, and collaboratively creating new production. So what we ended up doing is, with this brand new piece, we rented out the courtyard of a hotel nearby that had hotel rooms all around it, multiple stories, and we rented every single one of the hotel rooms. There was essentially big, it's old tobacco factories, big glass windows. There was an actor inside each room, completely isolated, and our design and production school and those teams created directional audio from each of those rooms, and they lit the courtyard, and the audience was in the courtyard, all socially distanced and masked. And this brand new piece that showed the isolation of artists, but also the interaction, through the use of technology, created live theater in a time where most people wouldn't go to the grocery store. It was pretty incredible. So, that's when I say what I take away from that is, there's always so many obstacles in our lives for the things that we want to achieve. that time had more limiting factors and more obstacles than any other that we've encountered. And we persevered as an institution and as a community. And the things that we were still be able to achieve in the arts were incredible. So I take from that. And that was the big lesson I learned. And so anytime we have these opportunities or challenges, we need to remind ourselves what we're able to achieve. And there is usually a whole other level of what we could do in most situations, that I think now we realize. That's probably a really important lesson for the all of higher education and all of the arts and entertainment industry. But that's one I think about still pretty regularly.
I want to pull on that thread of possibilities and perceived obstacles as it relates to you. I really was excited to see that you had studied bassoon. It's always great to dialogue with a fellow bassoonist. You've also studied conducting. Many people would not think it's possible with that educational background to land in a position like yours. So what feeling is in the middle between your musical and performance training and the skills that you need to be the chancellor of a conservatory?
Well, it was actually a pretty organic progression. Um, just studying music, and it all started from, being a introductory musician to where I sit today talking to you. I can see that path really clearly, and with any number of steps in that journey, if they take it away, I'm not sitting here, and not in this opportunity. I started playing the bassoon because there weren't a lot of bassoonists in the high school band, and so that gave me, by doing that, I had, as you I'm sure know from your experience as a bassoonist, I had 3 or 4 times more opportunities to do things quicker
Oh yeah.
because there were people trying to do it. And so I think that is a big reason why I studied music in the first place, because or if I hadn't had those opportunities, I probably wouldn't have studied music in college. It exposed me to a bigger picture of things. When I loved playing an orchestra, when I got and being around people and being around this huge, process and this community, essentially, that is what I feel in orchestras. Yeah, I naturally wanted to be as involved with that as possible, which led me to just pursue conducting, and then and then graduate study, and my professional career before administration was in conducting. And so from there to where I am today was a series of opportunities, just like that one where somebody asked me if I'd like to start playing the bassoon, and I was a conductor, like mostly a kind of itinerant guest conductor. That's part of my career. Right around the time I moved to Puerto Rico, and I was asked by the chancellor of the Puerto Rican Conservatory at that time. I was doing some part-time teaching, and she asked me. She said, "We've had difficulty filling this associate dean role. We think you would be really good at it." And I said, "Wow, I've never really thought of that." And I think I initially said no because it wasn't what I was planning on. But she told me, she said, give it some thought. I promise you that this opportunity here will bring you closer to music and closer to the art, not farther away from it behind the desk. And so I ended up saying yes, and she was right. But what that allowed me to do is it put me in the position to have a bigger view of the arts, have a bigger view of education, to have a higher level view, and giving people the opportunity to do that. We will all learn so many things, and we're up to the task so many more times than we think. But so much of it is giving people the opportunity to look over and see that larger picture. And so I was fortunate to be given those opportunities along the way. And I feel like your question about preparing for this role, I think that the skill set of being a conductor is very, very similar to being a dean or being chancellor, in the arts specifically, because it helps to be an artist, but you don't have to be. But the understanding of that realm and the heart of what we do in the first place, it certainly is very helpful. But if you think about what a conductor does, most people think that 90% of it is being on the podium. It's probably more like 15-20% of it, because so much more of it is managing people, of leadership values, like having a vision and getting people to buy into that vision and to go forward with you. like I said, being a manager, being a psychologist, being a business person, being a spokesperson, all of these things. But if you break that down into those components, that is the job, of a dean. That is definitely the job of a chancellor. But each one of those steps up higher up the ladder, and the greater responsibility that comes along with that, and accountability, enables or puts me in a position where I can see from a higher altitude. I can see the bigger picture, and so I feel like it's been really organic, and I don't think you have to be an artist to be in my position, but I think it certainly helps, and not just in an arts institution. I firmly believe that the training that we get, that you and I both have, and my students, your students, in the arts, the skill set is so transferable.
Mm-hmm.
I firmly believe that, and I see our students and our artists and their colleagues around the country achieve so many things. I see more and more businesses out there actively recruiting people from the creative arts, certainly from the liberal arts, because we're capacitated to do so many incredible things because of this transferable skill set. I mean, artists essentially often, it's the ultimate creative problem solver, because artists often are essentially, it's part of our job to create something out of nothing,
Mm-hmm.
to create order out of chaos, to sound a little more biblical, but that is something, to be able to see what isn't on the page and come up with a solution. That is inherently what artists do all the time on small and large scale. So it gets back to your original question about careers and trajectories. I think if we embrace that, and we reinforce that, and we celebrate that, then all of a sudden, it doesn't mean you can't go in some very traditional pathways in your career, but the pressure is off, because there are actually so many more possibilities when you really open your perspective about that. And so that's definitely provided a lot of gifts for me, and opportunities for me, and I want those same kind of doors opened, for all of our students that we currently have, and those that are they're going to be here in the future years.
Yeah, that's really phenomenal to hear. And I was really excited to read and learn about the strategic plan that you've put in place for UNCSA. I think a lot of people who don't work in arts administration can hear that phrase strategic plan and sort of, have eyes that glaze over. But, the way that you have contextualized it feels really exciting to me. And I kind of want to go through, a lot of the points that you put forward in your strategic plan, starting with institutional stability. So when I hear that phrase, and I know that when many people hear that phrase, they assume financial cuts. They assume, we aren't giving out as many scholarships, we're cutting back programming. What's your approach to this idea of institutional stability as it relates to this large strategic plan you've put in place?
Sure. Well, actually, the way we have it articulated in our plan is close to it. It's institutional sustainability.
Oh,
But the stability is kind of the inherent, like, today of that. So it's certainly a component of it. And it's a very valid question nowadays, because you see a lot of, in higher education, certainly in private institutions, but in a lot of public institutions now, you see some pretty dramatic cuts in programming, cuts in personnel, responding to some pretty dramatic enrollment challenges, that they've been predicted in this country for a long time. But the way UNCSA thankfully has not yet been in a situation like that. I mean, everybody has seen kind of enrollment go up and down. But for what our goal is with that focus in the strategic plan of institutional sustainability is, what are the things that we need to kind of really shore up to make sure that we don't get into that situation. When we talk about personnel and making sure that we solve some problems that we've had historically over many years with compensation, to make sure that we recruit but retain the really amazing people we have on our team, our faculty, our staff. Enrollment sustainability, making sure that we have that we're channeling, not just everybody wants to raise funds for scholarships, but we're raising the amount of dollars we're needing and putting it in the right places, and giving access and opportunity to as many people as we can. Facilities sustainability, and making sure that that we modernize what we have. So not just so that it doesn't fall down, but that it also it is the resources that they are the resources we need to have in place so that the students are coming here, are working in the state-of-the-art tools and the state-of-the-art spaces that are analogous to the opportunities, that's a smooth transition from studying to working. That there's no transition ideally, that you're already working in this kind of professional environment and it's a seamless transition into the professional world. So, and then, fiscal sustainability, making sure that we are using our resources, our current resources, to the greatest efficiency that we can so that we can build on those things. So we take the approach that we're trying to look at all those things to make sure that we are not in a situation in the future where we have to do that. And we're making, with every one of those four things in the past 2 years, we've made some really substantial progress. I'm really optimistic for us to be able to achieve the goals we put in that plan.
And it's not just the internal conversations that are represented in this strategic plan, but external as well, especially when you talk about industry relevance. When I hear industry relevance, I think about the fact that, there are so many concerts these days that I won't even spend the time or money to engage. And I have the training in 10 years in the orchestral field, much less people who have no organic connection. With that idea in mind specifically, how do you respond to this idea of industry relevance as it relates to the strategic plan?
Well, building on, I talked a little bit about that in the first question. I kind of put it into that. Building on those things I said there. I mean, so part of it is making sure, as I said earlier, that we are connected, that the programs we're doing, the opportunities, the work that's happening here is a direct relationship and connection to the real world, we'll say, to the opportunities that students that have today, and the opportunities, the Wayne Gretzky quote, like skating to where the puck's going to be, though it's an awareness of that, so that we are being as proactive and ahead of the curve as we can be, as opposed to just kind of waiting to see, what the demand is for, like how much can we foresee what the demand is going to be. And then, and then another aspect of, maybe three aspects I can think of with this would be kind of what I was building on with the skills students are going to need. A big aspect of that is, which you mentioned earlier, about UNCSA Media and the publishing arm, is, these are the kind of skills, the opportunities that students have to leverage what they do in a different way, and, building structures to help the ecosystem when they get out of here, but then also the experiential learning that happens with that. And then, there's examples of industry relevance within the different individual industries, that we train for in the school. I'm thinking about a really amazing drama production that we had recently. That was the School of Drama and School of Design Production produced a musical this semester. That was the As You Like It, which is the adaptation of Shakespeare's play. It's fantastic. It was modeled after the public theater. It was debuted in public theater in New York. And the whole nature of this presentation, we have all of our actors and designers, and they're at an incredibly high level, producing this great work of art. But the nature of this production is that it also involves an even larger number of community cast members. We had students, we had kids through adults, like ages, elementary school through some retired members of our community.
Wow.
An incredibly diverse pool of people that were members of the cast. So there was this unbelievable community engagement in that piece. And that is not just, people will say, oh, we need to have more community engagement or outreach. That's a part of it. But what that was is how many of, there's a really terrible situation in our country right now in the theater industry, where you're seeing some of the biggest public theaters, regional theaters in our country, not just scaling back, but some of the largest in our country closing. And so there's all kinds of challenges built up in that, but the relevance to our society, relevance to our audiences and our public, connecting to that public in a different way, just like in a work like this, that is not only important to our community, that is really important to the future of the theater industry and its relevance, especially in, what makes up most of the theater, by the population in the country. Broadway is not going anywhere. Right. And that's great. That's a super important thing. And for actors, there are lots and lots of expanding opportunities on screen, not just on stage. But to really, this is a way to establish a whole other kind of relevance and connection to our community. So there's another example there, and you would see some other very specific examples if you went through each of the different industries in terms of how can we how what is relevant to the industry today, and how can we connect our students and their experience to that, right now.
And when you talk about the diverse cast that was centered, I can't help but to think about the buzzword that diversity has become, even with equity, diversity, inclusion, belonging being a part of the strategic plan that you've put into place. This is a conversation that is happening in many ways. And something that came to mind for me was UNCSA's physical proximity to the affirmative action decision that was made, regarding, those sorts of initiatives. I wonder, what are some of the conversations that you've had internally about how to move that work forward of diversity and equity without it being just an initiative that's on paper or a buzzword for the sake of a funding conversation or something along those lines?
Sure, absolutely. Well, of those four letters, EDIB, equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging, for me, and I think for our community, I can speak for our community, the most important of those four is the last one, is the B, belonging. And we want to be a campus where every single person on this campus feels and integrally that they are part of this campus, that they belong on this campus. So those other elements that are just as important, equity throughout our population, having a diverse population of artists, that's just an incredibly it's critical to having lots of different voices at the table to what creates good art in the first place, to hearing all the different possibilities and all the different voices and perspectives. And inclusion goes along exactly with that. But if the B is the most important, because if we achieve that, that means that we've done a good job on everything else. Is that the result, the outcome that we're all looking for is that everybody feels like they belong here. So I think if everybody thinks about that way, it's pretty hard not to get behind that. Who doesn't want everybody to feel like they belong in the community they're in? As far as the affirmative action decision, it didn't really affect UNCSA, because the nature as much as it did, for example, other institutions within the UNC system,
Right.
which are all comprehensive institutions and universities, the nature of being a conservatory in that it's all based on audition. So it didn't really change any of our process. Every institution in the country is, very conscious and making sure that we understand any policy that comes down federally or from the state. It hasn't really changed the way we've had to approach things here. And I think we're making really good progress in this area too.
The reality is a person can't be a senior in high school and decide that they want to major in bassoon, for example. There's a runway that is
Yeah.
required. And UNCSA has the unique opportunity to also engage high schoolers as part of its
Yeah.
programming. Is there a runway up to being a high school student at UNCSA that your organization engages? What does that part of the conversation look like? Again, thinking about diversity and not just, wanting X amount of diverse students, but also
Yeah.
thinking about what it takes to get them to even be able to apply, to even be competitive enough to join, to be a student at that institution.
Yeah, that's a great question. First of all, our high school is such a cool thing. I think it's you could argue it's maybe our most important product, or the most important opportunity we provide. Certainly one that sets us apart instantly from any other institution. Sets UNCSA apart. The fact that we have this university, this high-level conservatory environment that also has a residential high school program. So that in itself is fantastic. But like you said, you can't just decide as a high school senior that you want to pursue bassoon, because there's a runway. There's a certain amount of training to get to a certain point. And that is the case with some disciplines more than others. Well, definitely with music and dance to some degree. Like there are kids who have been pursuing the music or dance for anywhere from 3 to 8 years, maybe before they're even applying to our high school program. I mean, some families are starting this really early, and so, but there are other areas where that's not the case. There are kids who absolutely could decide, because of the skills they've generated, that I want to go into acting. I want to have that experience. I want to go into filmmaking. I want to go into design and production, which has, 15 different areas you could go in. And that all speaks to just kind of areas of interest that a conservatory environment can quickly focus into some really meaningful career trajectories. But to your point, whether it is, it all comes down to access. And so whether we're giving access earlier and exposing people to the fact that these opportunities exist so that they, at an earlier age, can pursue music and dance, and also trying to narrow the gap of how many years it really takes to be ready, to be honest about what you really need to, where you need to be to get in. But, think about, example I think about all the time with design and production. They have this really amazing show they do every year. It's called Photana, which is all the lighting design students create this really amazing show with light and music and sound, and it's just this huge festival for the eyes and the ears, that any young kid, if they saw that, would be like, wow, I want to do that. They'll ask themselves, I can do that? Like, I can do that for a career? That's just one example of any other number of areas where just have to be able to imagine themselves in that space, and be able to be invited to kind of get permission to imagine themselves in that space, and then certainly to realize that this place is an opportunity and you could be here. And that comes down to exposure, comes down to certainly access has elements of financial obstacles, but it also comes down to just being there and putting an opportunity in front of you, and somebody saying, look at this, look how great this is. You could do that, and you could actually do this for the rest of your life. And these are the doors it opens. So that applies certainly to our high school, in terms of there are a lot of meaningful opportunities in the arts that we've been talking about. But if people don't hear about them earlier, if we don't put them in front of them and allow young kids to imagine themselves in those spaces, whether it's going to take 2 to 5 years of training to be ready for it, or if it's not even really going to take any training, it's going to be a matter of, like, you're a really smart person who has a drive and a will to explore something. You can come do this 2-year high school program. Some of our high school programs are 9 through 12th grade. Some of them are just 11th and 12th, and there's one that's only 12th grade. But it comes down to all these different dynamics of access. That was a really long-winded answer to your question.
I loved it. And, when you talk about access and exposure, I'm thinking about how much you're exposing to the world to all of UNCSA's really great work through UNCSA Media, which you've mentioned a couple times. I wonder if you can speak a little bit to what had to be developed for this initiative to come to fruition. Many conservatories record their concerts and do those sorts of things. But what are the extra steps that it took for you to really solidify UNCSA Media as a major initiative of the conservatory?
Sure. It's what I'm really excited about. It's definitely kind of a passion project for me. And we launched it in October. End of September. But it's something we've been working on for several years. Actually, we're ready to launch the first phase of it in May of 2020, and something happened that month.
Yeah, something did happen.
So we had to delay that, but it actually gave us a chance to really step back to the core values of what we're trying to do in the first place. And what I want to say is that inherently, what UNCSA Media is an IP strategy. It's an intellectual property strategy. It's manifesting itself in this first phase as a record label. But what it is that's just kind of the easy first step for it. It is a media publishing arm for this UNCSA, or for our ecosystem of artists. And the goal is to build the importance of intellectual property, the value of it, and the importance of how artists should own their intellectual property and control it, to put that in the center of the educational process, to put that in the center of the perspective of young artists. So there's a lot, if you think about it just in terms of musical terms, it's maybe the example that people are most acquainted with. There are challenges for musicians to make money nowadays and monetize recorded music, or a lot of the different kinds of music that we publish, that we put out there, because and usually very often, in order to put that music out there, with record labels, with other publishing entities, we are forced to, or feel like we're forced to, sign away the rights to that material. And it's transactional. I get it, and it's there. It's not the one evil monolith versus all the other artists. It's a nuanced thing, but more often than not, it is the art, what the artist creates. They are not able to leverage its value. It's other people that leverage that value over them. So what we want to do is put that at the center and create this media. We're creating this media publishing arm for the artists of our ecosystem, so that essentially it's a nonprofit, mission-driven publishing entity that starts out with music, but very quickly in the next couple of years, it's going to include film and video. It's going to include choreography. It's going to include printed materials, books that people in our ecosystem are writing, within our artistic disciplines. There's even discussion about how patents could be involved in this. We have a lot of designers, and we have a new animatronics program that's creating all kinds of new things that could be patented. But it's all intellectual property. So we can essentially help the artists of our ecosystem, really predominantly, especially initially focused on our alumni and our faculty, people who've kind of got to the point where they're ready. They've been out enough to kind of generate some projects that are ready for this, where they can bring those projects to UNCSA Media. We can put them out there. We can help leverage our institutional resources, our networks, to publish and communicate those. But we don't have to leverage the ownership of it. Our artists, for example, with this record label initiative that was the first phase of it, they own the masters. They own the publishing rights. They own the content, and any kind of residuals that have to come into it just go right back into the label to the media publishing arm to produce the next product. So that same model we can only do with the artists of our ecosystem, because it is an ecosystem. And it's mission driven as opposed to profit driven for us. I'm very optimistic that over time it will actually be self-sustainable, because we can really scale these things up quite a bit to make that happen. But that's real, so independent of the type of media, music or film or video, it's really just the first part of what is a part that has a much more important aspect to it, which is really want this to turn into a clearinghouse for artists to hold, and then help them license and sell that material as well, not just publish. So that's the long game, is to create that. And there's all kinds of applications on the back end of how that will work in the future that, you hear a lot of talk today about in these terms of monetization and, blockchain and systems of tracking ownership and things like that. There's all kinds of dynamics to that, but, that we will get into, but we really want to start at the core kernel of this, which is the value of intellectual property and the value for our artists to own it and leverage it. So we want to help that happen and just build these concentric circles of opportunity in this mission-driven media publishing arm to help our artists further their careers, to help them leverage what they are creating and not somebody else leverage it.
Yeah, and I really appreciated seeing this album Windows that's under this project. Loved seeing all of the familiar composers listed, none of which were Beethoven or Brahms or any of those folks, which I have really, really appreciated. But to your point about teaching the importance of intellectual property, when you talk about when you have to engage the conversation of residuals and those things, and pushing that back to the artists, who are those artists? Are we specifically talking about the composers? Do the students have a fiscal benefit to being involved? What does that look like?
Well, it really depends on the project. So, the first project that we put out, the Windows project, was it was an institutionally produced project. So our Dean of the School of Music, Saxton Rose, conceived the idea for that album. connected with those composers, recorded it. It was recorded by an alum of our school, Bill Stevens, who's a really talented engineer that owns the largest studio here in Winston-Salem. And so that, as an institutionally project, was more to promote certainly those composers and the music, but also the faculty perform. It was all faculty that were recording that project. So that one doesn't have the same dynamics as kind of the long-term vision of the industry, because that's a one-off, institutionally self-produced thing. Most often, what's going to happen is that an alumnus or faculty member brings a project that they have realized and they've recorded, and they're going to bring it to us, and then we're going to publish it for them. So if there are residuals and where they go really depends on the project, because it could be, for example, could be a solo cellist that comes in and has a recording, and that's a very easy negotiation. It could be something where that person is the performer and the composer or the songwriter, and essentially everything is going to them. Or it could be something more complex where there are other kinds of rights and royalties at play. A composer that was commissioned, a small orchestra that was used to record the piece, or a band, or any number of things. So we're setting up some models right now for how those would most often work, but it'll really often come down to the nature of the project. But the one that we just did, like I said, Windows, was kind of an institutionally produced project, and we'll do those every now and then. But I would say 75% or more of the time, it's going to be these self-produced projects that people bring to us, and then we publish and they're ready to go, as opposed to us conceiving the project and bringing the entities in and producing it ourselves.
Okay. And a special shout out to someone you mentioned, Dean Saxton Rose, bassoonists. We're out here doing big things in the world.
That's right. Power.
Yeah. So what advice would you give to parents, or even potential students who are looking to join the UNC-SA family? What do they need to come prepared with beyond their skills that are in place? Are there other things that they need to think about, considering the direction that you're moving the school in?
Well, I mean, it's an amazing place, and of course you're going to expect me to say that, but I say that in all honesty. I've never seen a place like this because of the makeup of it, because we have a high school and a university and a graduate school program, and because it's all 5 of these arts conservatories in this 74 acres of land, all happening very collaboratively. It really is this ecosystem. I used that word earlier. I think so. So knowing what you're coming into, like, this is a space to really do some amazing creative things. But it's a really intense place. It's a conservatory environment. So the balance of time that you spend on doing art is much higher than you're going to have the hours that you spend, the percentage of hours you're going to spend as a music or a drama major at a comprehensive university. It's just greater. That's kind of the nature of it. And they're really good. They're really great things about that conservatory model, and there's some things that are challenging that that we're continually trying to evolve to be a conservatory of this this and the next century. But to answer your question, though, is really knowing what you're coming into. It's and you can think about it as our students spend an extraordinary amount of time, hours and hours and hours in their art studio or in the rehearsal room. But it's kind of like a lot of high school kids. If you think about the amount of time they spend in class in their high school, and then you add up all the other time they spend in a variety of extracurricular activities, maybe doing sports, maybe doing scouts or some kind of club, or any number of or art or music classes, or you just take all that extracurricular time that most kids are using, you just focus it into one. It's a very focused thing, which is that art study that happens here. So it's intense. The students that come here really understanding that, and parents ready for that, they excel very quickly. We try to do a very good job of explaining, preparing people for what that environment is like. But when somebody has expectations for something else, it can be really challenging, and it might not be what a family wants. It's an enormously supportive environment. We've been building out our student support structures, particularly over the last 2 and 3 years, and it's an amazing team of people at the high school and the college level that it's consistently and constantly trying to make even greater resources. So it's a very supportive infrastructure. However, but it is very intense. So the students come here typically, not trying to figure out what they want to do, kind of
Mhm.
have a pretty good idea and hit the ground running. And we want to support them in doing it. But I would say, that's the biggest advice is, and doesn't mean, particularly at the high school level, that every student who comes here has to go into the professional arts. Plenty have great success at the high school level and go into any number of things. But you have to be here wanting that immersive kind of intensive experience. It can apply to lots of different things, but it is going to be that. But that's why, our students go out and do some really amazing things, particularly our high school students. They come in and they have this really broad experience that essentially, in a lot of ways, from a curricular and a time management standpoint and artistic development standpoint, is a lot like what a lot of kids have achieved through 4 years of college. So a lot of our high school students finish this, whether it's 4 to even 1 year of the program, and then they transition into college. And it's not a really big transition because that environment that most kids have to really get used to when they go into college, a lot of our high school students are like, well, I've already done that.
Yep.
So they are ready to go, and they are farther ahead than many of their future colleagues when they do go to college, if they do choose to. So they achieve some great things because of that experience that they have here, and just this long list, impressive list of alums that we're very proud of, that are examples of that. So that's what I would share with prospective parents and students.
Sure. Well, I want to wrap us up by circling back around to, one of the earlier parts of our conversation when we think about all of the folks out here with, bachelor's, master's degrees, even DMAs, and still don't quite have that job. One of the things that I try to preach in this stage of my life is that arts admin is not something that you can just fall back into. I almost consider it something that you graduate into. But with that being said, is there any advice that you could give to early career arts professionals who may see the reality of being, as you mentioned, the principal clarinet of the New York Philharmonic, not maybe something that is going to happen in this lifetime, but other building bridges to other possibilities that are equally impactful to arts ecosystems? How where should they start, or what are the skills they need to think about cultivating?
Well, I think often, it's certainly been in my experience, people have a lot more, people in so many cases have the skills to be successful in these leadership roles, that they maybe just don't realize.
Hmm.
And I see it as a responsibility for me, as I'm bringing in people to my team, or as we're bringing in people to UNCSA's team, to try to recognize that and give people opportunities. Not everybody is going to be exactly ready for every single one of these opportunities. And I'll be honest, I wasn't completely ready for it when I was given them, when I got my first administrative role. And I learned a ton in a very short amount of time. So people have more skills than they realize. And particularly those, like I said earlier, that grow up and have this creative arts training experience, like the skill set is so transferable. But along the way, what I would say is, you have to just be open to the possibilities. Like when I gave that example of being offered that opportunity as an associate dean, my first inclination was, well, no, that's interesting, but that's not for me because I'm focused on this.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of had to step back and say, well, I'll try this and be open to a different path. And that path ended up being, everything. I had no idea at the time that was the case. So there, and not everything is going to be an opportunity, like to immediately go into a leadership position like that. But there are lots of other opportunities to expand our vision and horizons about being a part of something that leads places that we don't necessarily recognize at first. So I think a lot of leadership is like, if I think back to getting into conducting in the first place, I loved playing orchestra. I wanted to be as involved in it as possible. So I was looking for ways to be as involved in that experience as I could, and eventually that led to conducting. But there's lots of ways to be involved in all the different things that we do, and to zoom out, to put yourself in a position where you can, as much as possible, zoom out and take in the context of everything, and understand like how that fits into the larger picture, how these things that we do, how that, sitting and playing the bassoon part in an orchestra, what that, this is another transferable skill, listening to what that means and how it affects all the other people you're playing with, how that impacts the sound to the audience. That one little piece of the puzzle affects everything. So once I, as a conductor, was able to step back and then see that piece within the whole, that made me a better musician. When I was able to step into administrative positions and see the entirety of the academic and artistic enterprise in a larger picture, that taught me something, and that made me maybe a better musician and artist. It certainly made me a better leader, and a ability to serve the institution in a different way. And the more of those opportunities I get, and I grow into this more and more every single day. But I'm constantly reminding myself to make myself zoom out and see the larger picture. So there's no time like the present for anybody to start doing that. And that is a really great path, a mindset to put yourself on a path to leadership roles, administrative roles. And artists have the skills to do that. It's mindset and opportunity.
Music there by Jesse Montgomery from the Windows album produced by the University of North Carolina School of the Arts. That's the Presto movement from Jesse's duo for violin and cello. Congrats to Jesse on all of her successes. I'll actually be working with her in April with the Illinois Philharmonic, so I'm looking forward to being with her on the ground. And of course, shout out and thanks to Brian Cole for all of the work he's doing over at UNCSA and for coming on the show to talk about it. Bravi tutti. All right, so my triloquy this week is inspired by my latest trip to the Sphinx conference. So I've been attending the Sphinx conference for over a decade now. I was trying to count. I may be mistaken, but I think this past weekend was my 12th conference. If you don't know what the Sphinx conference is, visit sphinxmusic.org. Really one of the key institutions, if not the key institution when it comes to diversity in classical music, diversity in the arts. When I was first attending the conference years ago, it was primarily as a musician. I played in the orchestra, played for the competition, family reunion vibes with all the Black musicians. It was great. And then as my profile as a speaker and a media producer continued to grow, I ended up getting on the speaking stage more often than not. So leading panels, participating in panels, and doing all that sort of thing. Well, this year for me was even different because I was really there to, I kind of hate that word networking, but really just there to collaborate with other artistic directors, CEOs, people with positions like mine, equity focused positions, to see what we can build for composers and for composer advancement. So really great conversations and collaborations coming down the line with some really great orchestras across the country. I also met a lot of first timers this year, especially some Black musicians from HBCUs that loved it. And I loved being there with them. It's all about community building, and I really appreciate the opportunity and the platform and the space created year after year by the Sphinx organization. I have lots of gratitude for Afa, Dworkin, Aaron Dworkin, the founder. Shout out to Andre, who leads many of those programs. Just really, really great organization that I've had mixed feelings about in the past, but when it's all said and done, I think they're really doing great work. I want to say that at the outset, because there's something about this idea of diversifying classical music that has inspired a shift in values and thinking for me. It makes me think about, and I feel like I've talked about it here before, but it makes me think about the ways in which we fortify existing systems through these programs and initiatives as opposed to dismantling them and rebuilding them. We've gotten to a really great place where we're opening the door wider for folks who would otherwise be marginalized or not be able to make it into these spaces of so-called classical music because of systemic racism, systemic patriarchy, and those sorts of things. But what if we just removed the door and removed the walls around it? I think that when we talk about, all of these people, and this isn't a slight at anyone, but I think when we talk about all of these people who have done what was seen as impossible and traversed these systems and really made it work in classical music, one of the things, I won't say all we're doing, but one of the things that we're doing is um, uh, platforming this industry as something that should continue the way it is because there are Black folks participating in it. I'm thinking about repertoire primarily. I'm thinking about the degree to which we still don't really foreground and center living composers, how we treat this genre as a museum or something from the past as opposed to something living and something breathing. I'm really, really interested in dismantling these systems and rebuilding something new. But the more we talk about diversity in the arts, the more I feel like we're just continuing the same old thing, just with a Black face on it. So, what does it look like to dismantle? I think that is a very important question, an important thing to think about. Um, and I'm continuing to think about what that looks like myself. But in the meantime, I really believe that step one is planting in people's mind the seed of truth that white supremacy culture is the foundation of classical music as we know it, even if you do have Samuel Coleridge Taylor on the stage or Florence Price, William Grant still on the stage. There is a white supremacy culture that undergirds all of that that we really have to address and engage. I want to shout out Joy Goodry for leading a really great panel at Sphinx about the post-classical musician. I personally believe that we can't just give that word to the status quo, that word classical, the phrase classical music, jazz, blues, country, bluegrass, hip hop, creative music, like what Andre 3000 is putting out and all of those folks. I consider that classical music. So I think we just need to reframe the way we think about that phrase, just the key concept of this podcast, but also think about the ways in which we perpetuate systems and fortify systems by centering diversity within those systems as opposed to dismantling things and rebuilding something different. I told my boss earlier this week, I'm falling out of love with orchestras because we won't just do the things we need to do. We won't just put Beethoven and Brahms on the shelf and center in an actual way living composers. We won't just hire Black musicians. We have to figure out how to get them through the audition process and making things quote unquote fair. They're just radical things that I feel like we could do that we won't do that the industry will benefit from if we just finally get there. So, and I don't mean to discredit anyone who wants the affirmation of winning an audition and getting traversing the system as the system was built. I think there is room to have some pride in that, to be proud for that. But also, as I often say, being Black in this country comes with so many challenges. There are things that I believe are okay to just give us. Among those things are spots in American orchestras. Also, now that I'm thinking about it, shout out to the Black Orchestral Network who had their Day of Solidarity earlier this week. So there are so many groups, initiatives, collectives that are trying to shift things in this field. Including the Sphinx organization. And as far as I'm concerned, all of those folks are doing good work. I'm here to talk about what it looks like if we just flip it all on its head, say goodbye to the rules, say goodbye to the status quo, and just actively do what needs to be done that we spend so much time talking about. Hire somebody Black. Put living composers on your program. Shelve the so-called canon for a while. No one is going to die. No one is going to miss out on a classical experience. And the field is going to be transformed, not fortified, not enhanced. It's going to be transformed. Let's talk about transformation when it comes to the future ahead. We're in Black History Month. A lot of people have started to call this Black Futures Month. So maybe I'll have to adopt some of that. Let's think about the future and how we can radically radically change things for a better arts ecosystem and more broadly, a better world. While I'm here on this microphone and thinking about it, I want to call once again for a ceasefire in the Middle East. Let's continue to think about what colonization looks like in that context and what peace can bring us. And let's continue to fight the good fight, especially on this Black History Month 2024. And we even get an extra day on this leap year, Black History Month. So, hey, maybe we'll have to all do something special on the 29th day of February to celebrate this Black History Month. Anyway, thanks so much again for listening, for all of your support, and I'll talk to y'all again next week. Until then, peace.